A 20-year-old graduate student had just arrived at an apartment after driving through empty streets wearing a silver robe and slippers. His friend had been on FaceTime with him minutes earlier, heard his car start, saw the early morning sky behind him. Then the call disconnected. That message would be the last communication anyone would ever receive from Jimmy J. Lee. What happened in the next hour inside that apartment would remain hidden for 939 days. A secret maintained through lies, cover-ups, and a carefully orchestrated disposal that would take nearly 3 years to unravel. But investigators would eventually piece together a timeline that would shock Oxford, Mississippi, and expose a relationship conducted entirely in shadows. Because at 6:05 a.m., just 2 minutes after that final message, someone inside that apartment searched Google for something that would change everything. How long does it take to strangle someone, Gabby Petito? By 7:25 a.m., Jay's distinctive car would appear on surveillance cameras 9 miles away, abandoned in a parking lot with his personal items still inside but his phone conspicuously missing. By 7:34 a.m., a man in black shorts and a gray hoodie would be captured on camera, jogging away from that car in 86-degree July heat, barely sweating despite the oppressive Mississippi summer morning. By evening, Jay's mother would be calling police, her voice breaking as she reported her son missing on her birthday, the one day they always connected multiple times. By the next day, investigators would discover thousands of private messages revealing a secret relationship Jay never told his family about, a connection that existed only through disappearing Snapchat communications. And by week's end, they would have a suspect in custody, though the evidence they possessed told a story without the most crucial piece, a body. But it would take almost 3 years, a mistrial with a hung jury that devastated a family searching for closure, and skeletal remains discovered by hunters in a rural dumping ground before justice would finally, painfully arrive. This case asks uncomfortable questions. What happens when someone lives 2 completely different lives? What are the deadly consequences of shame and secrecy? And why would 11 jurors vote to convict while 1 refused, forcing everyone to wait years for justice? To understand what happened between 6:03 a.m. and 7 a.m. on July 8, 2022, we need to go back. Back to when Jay Lee and Timothy Harrington both began a connection one could never publicly acknowledge. Jimmy J. Lee grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, in a home where love had no conditions. His parents, Jimmy Lee Sr. and Stephanie Lee, created a home where faith and authenticity both mattered. When Jay came out as gay, there was no rejection. His father was a pastor who understood his son was exactly who he was meant to be. That acceptance shaped everything Jay became. Jay was bright, creative, magnetic. He transformed rooms just by entering them. By his teenage years, he knew he wanted to help vulnerable people in real, tangible ways. At the University of Mississippi, Jay flourished. He completed his undergraduate degree early with honors, then entered a master's program in social work. He wanted to work with LGBTQ+ youth who didn't have accepting families. He wanted to be for them what his parents had been for him. But Jay wasn't only serious ambition. He performed in drag shows across Oxford. His fashion choices turned heads everywhere. Bright colors, bold patterns, makeup as art. He was unapologetically himself. His closest friends were Braylon Johnson and Jose Moth Reyes. They were chosen family who understood what it meant to be young, black, and queer in Mississippi. The bond with his mother Stephanie was profound. They spoke multiple times daily. Jay called her about everything: his classes, his dog Lexus, a Pomeranian he adored, his plans for the future. Stephanie understood him completely. She could hear something wrong in his voice. She knew when he was hiding something. That knowledge would become crucial on July 8, 2022. Despite his openness, Jay had secrets too. He was seeing someone, having intimate encounters, arguing with them, blocking them on social media, then unblocking and going back. The relationship was messy when one person can live openly while the other lives in fear of exposure. Jay's friends knew he was involved with someone but didn't know who. The entire relationship was conducted through disappearing Snapchat messages and late-night visits nobody witnessed. One person controlled when they connected and when they didn't. Jay deserved better, but feelings don't follow logic. Sheldon Timothy Harrington Jr. was born into prominence in Grenada, Mississippi. His family was foundational to the community, church-connected, business-oriented, the kind of family where reputation mattered more than almost anything, where appearances had to be maintained. Timothy was 22 in July 2022. He had been a student at Ole Miss and started a moving business. From the outside, he appeared to be building a respectable life, but that public image was carefully constructed. Timothy was living two entirely separate lives. One, his family, church, and community saw. Another that existed only in Snapchat messages and stolen moments. Timothy was not openly gay. His family's church connections made that feel impossible. His community's expectations made that seem unbearable. He couldn't acknowledge his attraction to men publicly. He lived in the closet, which meant constant fear, fear of discovery, fear of judgment, fear of losing everything his family name represented. He created a Snapchat account using Redeye24. Through that account, he connected with Jay Lee. They began having intimate encounters, but these weren't relationship dates. They were secret, hidden. Timothy would reach out when he wanted to see Jay. They would meet. Then Timothy would disappear until he wanted another encounter. The dynamic was built entirely on Timothy's terms. Jay accepted this unequal arrangement even though it hurt him. Timothy controlled everything. When they met, where they met, how long they spent together. Jay would express frustration. Timothy would pull back. Jay would try to move on. Then Timothy would reach out and Jay would return. This pattern played out for months. Arguments followed by makeups. Blocking followed by reconnecting. By early July 2022, something shifted. Jay was genuinely tired of the pattern, tired of being someone's secret. Friends said Jay seemed ready to move on for real, and as Jay pulled away authentically, Timothy's fear intensified. Prosecutors would argue that Timothy's greatest fear was public exposure, that someone in Grenada, in his church, in his family, would discover he had been intimate with men. Jay had messages proving their relationship. Jay could destroy Timothy's secret with screenshots. Whether Jay would actually do that is unknowable. Friends said Jay wasn't vindictive. But in Timothy's mind, consumed by fear, the possibility existed. That possibility, prosecutors would argue, became something he couldn't tolerate. When investigators accessed Jay's iCloud backup, they found a complete relationship timeline. Thousands of communications between Jay and Redeye24. Intimate messages, arguments, makeups, plans to meet, frustrations about secrecy. The messages showed genuine care mixed with toxic patterns. Timothy would express feelings, then disappear for days. Jay would express hurt. Timothy would minimize it or turn situations around. Jay would set boundaries. Timothy would push past them or pull away until Jay came back. By early July 2022, the messages showed serious strain. Jay had blocked Timothy's primary account. Full block. That means, I don't want to hear from you. I'm done. But Timothy wasn't ready to accept that. When Jay blocked his main account, Timothy created or accessed a second secret Snapchat account to reach Jay again. He knew Jay had blocked him. He deliberately circumvented that boundary. In the early morning hours of July 8th, Timothy sent messages from this second account. Jay initially resisted, but Timothy was persistent. He apologized. He said he wanted to make things right. Jay, perhaps hoping for resolution, perhaps exhausted, eventually agreed to return. The messages between 5:17 and 6:03 a.m. tell a haunting story. Timothy sent, "Come back." Jay seemed hesitant. Timothy pushed, "You coming or no?" Then Jay expressed something prophetic. "Now it seems like you trying to lure me over there to beat my ass or something." Some instinct was warning him. His gut sensed danger. But Timothy responded, "You trippin'. We cool. I ain't trying to end it like this." That phrase carries weight. End it like this. What did Timothy mean? End the relationship on bad terms? Or something more ominous only he knew? Jay, apparently reassured, agreed to return. At 6:03 a.m., Jay sent his final message. Open it. He had arrived. Minutes later, at 6:05 a.m., someone using Timothy's phone searched, "How long does it take to strangle someone, Gabby Petito?" Prosecutors would argue this showed premeditation. July 8, 2022 started in early morning darkness for Jay Lee. At 2:13 a.m., he sent his mother a birthday message. At some point in those early hours, he and Timothy were together. They had an intimate encounter. Then they argued. The argument escalated enough that Jay blocked Timothy and left around 4 a.m. Surveillance footage shows Jay arriving home at 4 a.m. He entered briefly, left again, returned, then stayed inside wearing his silver robe, slippers, and gold bonnet. His dog Lexus was barking inside. Jay settled in, presumably planning to rest. Around 5:45 a.m., his friend Khalid Fears called. They chatted on FaceTime. During that call, Jay told Khalid something crucial. He had been with a man earlier. They were intimate. Then they argued and Jay blocked him. But now that man had reached out from a different account, apologizing, saying he wanted to make things right. Jay told Khalid he was considering going back, but Jay made his decision. He would return and try to resolve things. Khalid heard Jay's car start. Through FaceTime, he saw the early morning sky behind Jay. Then the call disconnected. Khalid tried calling back. No answer. He had no way of knowing that was the last time he would ever hear Jay's voice. Based on surveillance footage, phone records, and testimony, investigators pieced together what happened next. Jay arrived at Timothy's apartment around 6:03 a.m. He sent that final text. Open it. He entered. Then at 6:05 a.m., someone using Timothy's phone searched how long it takes to strangle someone. What happened between 6:05 and 7 a.m. has never been fully revealed. Prosecutors built a theory. They believe Timothy harmed Jay fatally, that it likely happened quickly after Jay arrived, that Timothy then faced a crucial decision: call for help and expose their relationship, or hide what happened and protect his secret. Timothy chose secrecy. That choice set in motion a cover-up investigators would unravel. Between 7 a.m. and 7:25 a.m., surveillance cameras captured crucial events. Jay's distinctive black Ford Fusion with its gold racing stripe and "I love my Pomeranian" sticker appeared entering Molly Bar Trail's apartments at 7:25 a.m. The driver wasn't visible. At 7:34 a.m., cameras captured a man in black shorts and gray hoodie jogging away from where Jay's car was parked. The man appeared to be Timothy. He wasn't running hard. He was jogging casually despite 86-degree heat. A friend of Timothy's, Keziah Carter, was driving home from his night shift around 7:45 a.m. He saw Timothy jogging and honked. Timothy immediately asked for a ride back to his apartment. Carter noticed Timothy seemed slightly sweaty, but not exhausted, like someone who had run miles in July heat would be. Carter thought nothing of it at the time. Only later would this ride become significant. Timothy wasn't out for a morning jog. He was returning from abandoning Jay's car, trying to create distance between himself and the vehicle connecting him to Jay's disappearance. Later that morning, surveillance captured Timothy entering a Walmart. He purchased duct tape. Just duct tape. That purchase suggested he was gathering supplies for something. Prosecutors would later argue he was preparing to move or dispose of evidence. Timothy owned a white Ford Escape, but on July 8th, he was seen driving a box truck used for his moving business. He took that truck without notifying his business partner, which was unusual. The truck provided space and privacy his personal vehicle didn't offer. Perhaps the most damning surveillance came from Timothy's parents' home in Grenada. Security cameras captured him arriving on July 8th. He was seen changing his shoes, wiping them carefully, then retrieving a shovel and a wheelbarrow. These weren't items someone grabs casually. These were tools useful for digging and moving heavy objects. His parents apparently weren't home or didn't question why he needed them. He loaded them into the truck and left. Prosecutors would argue he used these tools to bury Jay's body in a rural area. Perhaps most telling were Timothy's internet searches over the following days. Before police announced where Jay's car had been found, Timothy was searching Molly Bar Apartments online. He was searching Find Jimmy Lee. He was searching Ole Miss Police. He was following the investigation before he was even part of it, monitoring what police knew, staying one step ahead. Prosecutors call this consciousness of guilt. Innocent people don't frantically search updates about a missing person they claim not to have seen. Timothy's digital footprint showed someone who knew exactly what had happened. Stephanie Lee spent her birthday on July 8th, becoming increasingly worried. Jay hadn't responded to her messages all day. He always responded. His silence was deafening. By evening, she was calling Oxford police, requesting wellness checks. Something was catastrophically wrong. A mother knows. Jay's friends checked his apartment. They could hear Lexus barking inside, but saw no sign of Jay. His personal items were there. His presence was everywhere except that he himself was gone. Friends started calling everyone, asking if anyone had seen Jay. Oxford's LGBTQ+ community mobilized immediately. They started searching, posting on social media, contacting everyone Jay knew. Around 9 p.m. on July 10th, a tow truck company called Oxford Police. They had towed a black Ford Fusion from Molly Bar trails. The car had been sitting there since July 8th. When police ran the plates, they discovered it belonged to Jay Lee. The missing person case became exponentially more serious. Police processed the car immediately. Inside, they found Jay's bank cards, his key ring, and other personal items. But his iPhone was missing. That phone could tell them who Jay had been communicating with, where he had been, what had happened. Gone. Fingerprint analysis revealed only Jay's prints, which meant whoever drove it there either wore gloves or wiped down surfaces. Police pulled surveillance footage from cameras around Molly Bar trails. They saw Jay's car entering at 7:25 a.m. on July 8th. They saw a man in black shorts and gray hoodie jog away at 7:34 a.m. The footage wasn't clear enough to definitively identify the man from appearance alone, but his build and gait matched Timothy. Investigators requested access to Jay's iCloud account. What they found changed everything. Thousands of messages between Jay and Red Eye the 24. The messages were intimate, emotional, and recent. The last exchange occurred in the early morning hours of July 8th, ending at 6:03 a.m. with Jay's message, "Open it." Tech investigators traced Red Eye 24 to an account registered to Timothy Harrington. Phone records showed Timothy's device was active at his Campus Creek apartment when those messages were sent. Suddenly, police had a clear person of interest, someone who had been with Jay that morning, someone who hadn't come forward despite Jay being missing, someone who had reasons to keep their relationship completely secret. On July 22, 2022, 2 weeks after Jay disappeared, Oxford police brought Timothy Harrington in for questioning. They had evidence connecting him to Jay through messages. They had surveillance placing him near Jay's abandoned car. They had internet searches showing consciousness of guilt. But they didn't have a body. They didn't have a crime scene. They needed Timothy to talk. Timothy arrived with a friend who was an attorney. He presented himself as cooperative, confused about why police wanted to speak with him. Detective Ryan Baker conducted the interview, building rapport while watching for inconsistencies. Timothy initially denied recent contact with Jay. He claimed they had known each other at Ole Miss but hadn't been close, hadn't seen each other recently, certainly hadn't been in any relationship. When confronted with the messages, Timothy's story shifted. Yes, they had communicated recently, but they were just casual friends catching up. When shown evidence of intimate messages, Timothy became defensive. He insisted the messages didn't mean what they looked like. He tried multiple explanations, none coherent with the actual content. Detective Baker asked Timothy directly, "When was the last time you saw Jay Lee?" Timothy responded that it had been months, maybe late spring. He definitely hadn't seen Jay on July 8th. He was home that morning, alone, sleeping. He had no idea where Jay was. Baker then presented surveillance footage showing someone matching Timothy's description jogging away from Jay's abandoned car at 7:34 a.m. on July 8th. He showed footage of Timothy's vehicle driving through Grenada that morning. He mentioned witnesses who saw Timothy acting unusual. Timothy's face showed recognition that his lies were collapsing. After conferring with his attorney friend, Timothy provided a new version. Yes, he admitted, Jay had been at his apartment that morning. They had hung out briefly. Jay was upset about something and left. Timothy didn't know where Jay went after that. He certainly didn't have anything to do with Jay's car being at Molly Bar Trails. When Baker pointed out that Timothy's phone showed searches for Molly Bar apartments, before police announced that's where the car was found, Timothy stammered that he must have heard it somewhere. The interview ended with Timothy maintaining he had nothing to do with Jay's disappearance, while every piece of evidence suggested otherwise. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Share your location so we can see how far Jay's story is reaching. If you've made it this far, write "Justice for Jay" in the comments. Let's see who's still here paying attention to this important story. Based on the evidence accumulated, police arrested Timothy Harrington on July 22, 2022, charging him with capital murder. Capital murder in Mississippi requires specific conditions. Prosecutors charged Timothy arguing the killing involved concealment to avoid prosecution. The arrest shocked Grenada. The Harrington family was prominent. Timothy was supposed to be following the right path, but Oxford's LGBTQ+ community wasn't surprised. They understood the dangers of closeted relationships. Prosecutors faced a massive challenge. No body. Jay Lee was missing. Without remains, they couldn't determine cause of death. They couldn't present forensic evidence about exactly how Jay passed away. They had to build an entirely circumstantial case, but they had strong circumstantial evidence. The messages showing Jay went to Timothy's apartment, the Google search about strangulation, the abandoned car, the surveillance footage, the duct tape purchase, the shovel and wheelbarrow retrieval, the lies to police, the internet searches demonstrating consciousness of guilt. Piece by piece, they believed they could prove Timothy caused Jay's death even without remains. Timothy's defense team, led by attorney Afram Sellers, knew their strongest argument. No body means no definitive proof. Without remains, how could prosecutors prove Jay was deceased? Maybe he had run away. Maybe he was living somewhere else. The burden of proof was entirely on the state. Without physical evidence of death, that burden became harder to meet. The defense also planned to suggest alternative theories. Maybe Jay's involvement in Oxford's LGBTQ+ community put him in contact with dangerous people. Maybe someone else had motive to harm him. They would try to create reasonable doubt. Jay's friends refused to let his case fade. They formed Justice for Jay Lee. They held vigils outside the courthouse. They attended every hearing. They ran social media campaigns keeping Jay's name in public consciousness. They showed up at Ole Miss football games with signs demanding justice. They made certain that Oxford and anyone paying attention knew Jay Lee mattered. His mother, Stephanie, became a fierce advocate. She spoke to media. She pushed police and prosecutors. She refused to let her son become just another statistic. She wanted answers. She wanted justice. When the trial finally began in December 2024, more than 2 full years after Jay disappeared, palpable tension filled every corner of Lafayette County Courthouse. Jay's family sat in the front rows, steeling themselves for what they knew would be weeks of reliving their worst nightmare. Timothy's family sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, faces carefully neutral despite the cameras and scrutiny. The LGBTQ+ community packed the gallery completely, refusing to let this trial happen without witnesses who understood what was truly at stake. Media representatives from across Mississippi and neighboring states covered every single moment, recognizing this case as something that transcended typical crime reporting. Assistant District Attorney Gwen Ago delivered the prosecution's opening statement with controlled passion. She told the jury this was fundamentally a case about secrecy, shame, and the absolutely deadly consequences of living a double life in a community that demanded conformity. She carefully outlined how Timothy Harrington, unable or unwilling to accept his own sexuality publicly, had entered into a secret relationship with Jay Lee. How that relationship became increasingly volatile and unsustainable over time. How Jay eventually tried to end it permanently for his own well-being. How Timothy lured him back to his apartment on July 8, 2022, using manipulation and false promises of resolution. How mere minutes after Jay arrived at his door placing trust in him, Timothy searched how long it takes to strangle someone. How Jay never walked out of that apartment alive, and never would. Ago explained they would present overwhelming circumstantial evidence over the coming weeks. Digital messages documenting the entire relationship arc. Surveillance footage tracking movements throughout that critical morning. Witness testimony from people who knew both men and could speak to their patterns. Expert analysis of digital evidence that couldn't be explained away. Google searches revealing lethal intent at the exact moment of opportunity. Lies told to police repeatedly when the truth would have served an innocent man better. Consciousness of guilt behaviors at absolutely every turn. She acknowledged directly and honestly that they didn't have Jay's body to present to the jury. But she argued forcefully that the totality of evidence, when viewed as a complete picture rather than isolated pieces, would prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Timothy Harrington had caused Jay Lee's death, and then spent weeks methodically covering it, up to protect his secret. Over 2 weeks, prosecutors called dozens of witnesses. Stephanie Lee testified about her last communications with Jay, about knowing immediately something was wrong, about the nightmare of searching for her son. Her testimony was emotional, powerful, and humanizing. Jay wasn't just a case. He was a beloved son who spoke to his mother multiple times every day. Khalid Fears testified about the FaceTime call on the morning of July 8th. He described Jay telling him about being with a man, about blocking him, about the man reaching out again. He described hearing Jay's car start and seeing the sky behind him. Then the call disconnecting. Defense tried to suggest Khalid's memory was unreliable, but his testimony was specific and consistent. Braylon Johnson and Jose Moth Reyes testified about Jay's personality, his relationships, his patterns. They established that Jay taking his dog everywhere was normal. Leaving without Lexus suggested he planned to return quickly. They testified about Jay's excitement about his master's program, about his future plans. None of it was consistent with someone planning to run away voluntarily. Digital forensic experts walked the jury through recovered messages between Jay and Timothy, the progression from friendly to intimate, the arguments, the blocking, the messages from the second account, the final exchange ending at 6:03 a.m. with "Open it." Then, crucially, the Google search on Timothy's phone at 6:05 a.m. How long does it take to strangle someone, Gabby Petito? Prosecutors argued this search showed premeditation. Timothy wasn't reacting in the moment. He was planning. The defense would argue the search was coincidental, but the timing was devastating. Prosecutors presented hours of surveillance footage. Jay leaving his apartment at 5:58 a.m., his car entering Molly Bar Trails at 7:25 a.m., a man matching Timothy's description jogging away at 7:34 a.m., Timothy being picked up by Keziah Carter shortly after, Timothy at Walmart buying duct tape, Timothy at his parents' home retrieving a shovel and wheelbarrow. Every piece of footage supported the prosecution's timeline. The defense challenged whether the man in the footage was definitively Timothy. They argued the quality wasn't clear enough. But when combined with phone records placing Timothy's device at those exact locations at those times, the circumstantial case was strong. Defense attorney Sellers faced an uphill battle. The evidence against Timothy was extensive, but his strategy was clear: create doubt. Hammer the absence of a body, suggest alternative explanations, make the jury uncomfortable convicting without definitive physical proof of death. Sellers argued that without Jay's body, without forensic evidence about how someone passed away, without DNA or blood or crime scene proof, the state was asking the jury to speculate. And speculation isn't the standard for conviction. Proof beyond reasonable doubt is. Sellers attacked each piece of the prosecution's case. The messages showed a relationship, but didn't show murder. The Google search was suspicious, but maybe coincidental. The surveillance footage couldn't definitively identify Timothy. The duct tape purchase and tools could have innocent explanations. The lies to police happened because Timothy was scared and in shock. Sellers suggested the prosecution was making assumptions at every turn, assuming Jay was deceased, assuming Timothy caused it. But assumptions aren't evidence, and without Jay's body, how could they prove this beyond reasonable doubt? Perhaps most controversial was the defense's suggestion that Jay's LGBTQ+ lifestyle might have put him in contact with dangerous people, that his involvement in Oxford's gay community meant other potential suspects existed. Friends in the gallery bristled at this characterization. It felt like victim blaming. The prosecution objected repeatedly to this line of argument. Prosecutor Ago's closing was passionate. She walked the jury through every piece of evidence step by step. The messages proving Jay went to Timothy's apartment, the timing of the Google search, the abandoned car, the cover-up behaviors, the consciousness of guilt. She argued that while they couldn't physically present Jay's body, the evidence proved beyond any doubt that Timothy caused Jay's death. She asked the jury to use common sense. Why would Timothy lie about seeing Jay if he was innocent? Why would he search how to strangle someone at the exact moment Jay arrived? Why would he retrieve a shovel and wheelbarrow? Why would he abandon Jay's car miles away? Innocent people don't behave this way. Sellers countered that common sense cannot replace proof. That suspicion cannot replace evidence. He reminded them that in America, the burden is on the state to prove guilt. The defendant doesn't have to prove innocence. And without Jay's body, the state hadn't met their burden. After 11 hours of deliberation, the jury sent a note to Judge Kelly Luther. They were deadlocked, unable to reach unanimous verdict. The vote was 11-1 for conviction. 11 jurors believed Timothy was guilty beyond reasonable doubt, but one juror refused to convict. That juror reportedly said they couldn't vote guilty without a body. Without physical proof Jay was deceased, they couldn't convict. Judge Luther declared a mistrial. The prosecution would have to retry the entire case. Jay's family was devastated. They had sat through weeks of testimony. They had relived their trauma. And now they would have to do it all again. In early February 2025, exactly 939 days after Jay Lee disappeared, two hunters were walking through rural Carroll County, Mississippi. The area was known locally as an illegal dumping ground. The hunters were searching for deer when they noticed something that didn't belong. Bones. Not animal bones. Human remains. They immediately called Carroll County Sheriff's Office. Deputies and investigators responded. The remains were clearly human and had been there for an extended period. Advanced decomposition made visual identification impossible, but there was something crucial with the remains. A gold necklace, which he always wore. Within 2 days, forensic analysis confirmed what everyone hoped and feared. The remains were Jimmy J. Lee. After 939 days of searching, of hoping, of refusing to give up, Jay had been found. He was approximately 20 miles from Grenada, in an area investigators would later confirm Timothy was familiar with, an area his phone records showed him near in July 2022. The medical examiner examined the remains but delivered devastating news. The advanced state of decomposition meant they could not determine cause or manner of death. They couldn't definitively confirm Jay had been strangled, even though the Google search suggested that. They couldn't provide the forensic answers everyone wanted. But they could confirm identity. Jay Lee was deceased. This was now officially a murder case with recovered remains. Stephanie and Jimmy Lee faced unimaginable pain. They had searched for their son for more than 2.5 years. They had held out hope even when logic said hope was impossible. Now they had to accept what they had known in their hearts. Jay was gone. He had been gone since July 8, 2022. But there was also relief. Relief that he had been found. Relief that he wasn't alone somewhere unknown. Relief that they could bring him home and give him a proper burial. Jimmy Lee would later tell the court, "I had to witness my son's skeletal remains. I touched his skull. No father should have to go through that. No parent should have to endure that." The discovery changed everything legally. The defense's primary argument was eliminated. There was a body now. Physical proof Jay was deceased. Physical proof he had been left in a location consistent with Timothy's movements. The case that was already strong became overwhelming. On February 5, 2025, just 2 days after remains were confirmed as Jay's, a grand jury issued a new 2-count indictment against Timothy Harrington. Count 1. Capital murder with specification of concealment to avoid prosecution. Count 2. Tampering with physical evidence for moving and hiding the body. Timothy's defense team filed a motion arguing the tampering charge should be dismissed. Mississippi law has a 2-year statute of limitations for tampering with evidence. Jay disappeared July 8, 2022. The new indictment came February 5, 2025. That was more than 2.5 years later. Judge Luther heard arguments. The defense argued the clock started when the crime occurred in July 2022. The prosecution argued the clock started when they discovered evidence, when the body was found. The judge sided with the defense. The tampering charge was dismissed as filed beyond the statute of limitations. But the capital murder charge remained. Murder has no statute of limitations. The case could proceed. Prosecutors announced they would not seek the death penalty in the retrial. With the body found, with the evidence complete, they felt confident in securing a conviction without pursuing capital punishment. They would seek life in prison. District Attorney Ben Creekmore told media, "Justice was delayed, but justice was not defeated. We now have everything we need to prove Timothy Harrington caused Jay Lee's death. The jury will see the complete picture this time." Jury selection was set to begin December 2, 2025, almost exactly 3 years after the first trial began. Jay's family prepared to go through the ordeal again. His friends prepared to sit through testimony again. The LGBTQ+ community prepared to demand justice again. December 1, 2025 was supposed to mark day 1 of jury selection in Madison County. Potential jurors had been officially summoned weeks in advance. Prosecution and defense attorneys had prepared extensive questions designed to identify bias. Media crews had set up their equipment outside the courthouse building. Everyone in that courthouse expected a lengthy, methodical process of selecting 12 impartial jurors who could handle weeks of difficult testimony without prejudging the outcome. But before a single potential juror was even called into the courtroom, before any questions were asked or answered, defense attorney Afram Sellers requested an urgent sidebar conference with Judge Luther and prosecutors. What was said during that private conversation would change absolutely everything about this case. When the judge returned to the bench and called the courtroom to order, he made a completely stunning announcement that sent shockwaves through everyone assembled. Timothy Harrington wished to enter a guilty plea to all charges. There would be no trial, no jury selection, no weeks of testimony, no deliberation. The news rippled through the packed courtroom gallery like electricity moving through water. Jay's family looked utterly stunned, frozen in their seats. Relief and confusion mixed visibly on their faces as they tried to process what they had just heard. They had prepared themselves mentally for battle, steeling themselves to face Timothy across a courtroom again, prepared to sit through weeks of hearing evidence again, reliving the worst moments of their lives in excruciating public detail, prepared for the possibility of another mistrial, another hung jury, another delay in justice. And suddenly, without any warning or preparation, it was over. No trial would be necessary. No testimony would be heard. No jury verdict would be read. Just a guilty plea acknowledging responsibility for what had happened to Jay. Timothy stood before the judge, shoulders slightly hunched, face unreadable. For the first time in this entire 3-year case, he was publicly admitting responsibility for Jay's death. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, not the capital murder charge that could have meant life without parole. The state accepted this negotiated plea as part of an agreement both sides could live with. He also pleaded guilty to tampering with physical evidence for moving and hiding Jay's body, even though that charge had been legally dismissed earlier. Legal experts speculated on why Timothy changed course. With the body found, his strongest defense argument was gone. With the evidence complete, conviction seemed inevitable. The first trial showed 11 of 12 jurors believed him guilty even without a body. Now, with remains located exactly where investigators believed they would be, conviction appeared certain. By pleading guilty, Timothy avoided capital murder conviction. He avoided the possibility of life without parole. He also avoided putting his family through a public trial where intimate details of his double life would be exposed in open court with media coverage. His sexuality, his secret relationship, his lies to police, all of it would have been presented. The plea allowed some privacy for his family. Sellers later told media that Timothy made the decision himself after consulting with family and counsel. Redemption starts with accepting responsibility, Sellers said. Whether Timothy felt genuine remorse or simply recognized the writing on the wall, he was now convicted of causing Jay Lee's death. On December 2, 2025, Timothy Harrington appeared before Judge Kelly Luther for sentencing. Mississippi law allows for ranges based on the crime and circumstances. Second-degree murder carries up to life imprisonment. The state recommended 40 years total, 30 to serve with 10 suspended for murder, plus 10 years consecutive for tampering with evidence. Before imposing sentence, Judge Luther allowed victim impact statements. This was the moment Jay's family had waited for. The chance to look at Timothy and speak about what he had taken from them. Jay's father, Jimmy Lee, stood and addressed the court. His voice was steady but heavy with grief. "I'm here to give a message and just let Harrington know," he began. "Heaven will put you out, but you don't have to go there." Even in his pain, he offered redemption. He continued, "I knew from the beginning that you ended my son's life. I prayed for healing. We have been living July 8, 2022, every single day since that day. I had to witness my son's skeletal remains. I touched his skull. No father should have to go through that. No parent should have to endure that." Jay's mother, Stephanie, couldn't speak in court. Her emotions were too raw, but at a press conference afterward, she broke down describing the day she knew something was wrong. I knew in my heart," she said through tears. She thanked Oxford police and everyone who refused to give up searching. She said she would never stop missing her son. Never stop hearing his voice in her memories. Never stop wishing she could call him just one more time. Judge Luther addressed Timothy directly before sentencing. "Mr. Harrington, you still have a chance at life," Luther said. "Mr. Lee did not, but you still have a chance at life. I encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity." Luther then addressed the courtroom and anyone watching. He acknowledged concerns that because Jay Lee lived openly as a gay man in Mississippi, justice might not be served. "I want the world to know," Luther declared, "that Mississippi got it right this time." He sentenced Timothy to the recommended 40 years, 30 years to serve for second-degree murder with 10 years suspended, plus 10 years consecutive for evidence tampering. At age 25, Timothy would not be eligible for release until he was approximately 65 years old if he served the minimum. More likely, he would spend most or all of his remaining life incarcerated. Timothy offered no statement, no apology directly to the Lee family, no explanation for why he did what he did. Sellers later said Timothy never told him his motive. Whether it was shame about his sexuality, fear of exposure, a moment of rage, or something else entirely, Timothy kept that to himself. In the aftermath of Timothy's sentencing, Jay's parents announced new advocacy work. They were pushing for legislation called the Jay Lee Information Bill. The proposed law would make it illegal to refuse that technology companies release usernames, passwords, and account information to law enforcement immediately when someone under 21 is reported missing. Jimmy Lee explained, "If they had only allowed this login information to be given immediately, the suspect would have been found much quicker. He had a lot of time to do things he needed to do, to get rid of evidence." They specifically blamed Apple for refusing to provide Jay's account information immediately, forcing police to go through lengthy legal processes. During that delay, Timothy had time to cover his tracks. Had police gotten the messages immediately, they argued, they might have found Jay before 939 days passed. The bill faces challenges. Technology companies argue they need to protect user privacy, that giving law enforcement immediate access without oversight could be abused. But Jay's parents argue that when a young person is missing, when every hour matters, privacy concerns should take a back seat to potentially saving a life. Jay's case resonated deeply within LGBTQ+ communities across Mississippi and beyond. It highlighted the dangers of closeted relationships, the violence that can erupt when shame and secrecy collide with authentic living, the way internalized homophobia can turn deadly. Activists used Jay's case to push for better protections for LGBTQ+ individuals, for education about healthy relationships, for resources for people struggling with their sexuality, for creating environments where coming out feels safer than staying closeted. They argued that if Timothy had felt accepted for who he was, if he hadn't internalized such profound shame about being attracted to men, perhaps Jay would still be alive. The grassroots movement that formed when Jay first disappeared didn't end with Timothy's conviction. Jay's friends continued advocacy work. They spoke at universities about recognizing warning signs in relationships. They pushed for LGBTQ+ inclusive education in schools. They demanded better missing persons protocols for marginalized communities. They ensured Jay's legacy wasn't solely about being a victim of violence. It was about being a vibrant young man who lived authentically, who pursued his dreams, who loved openly. They wanted people to remember Jay for his drag performances, his fashion sense, his social work aspirations, his love for his dog, his devotion to his mother. Not just for how he was taken, but for how he lived. Jimmy J. Lee was 20 years old when his life ended. He had completed his undergraduate degree early with honors. He was pursuing a master's in social work because he wanted to help LGBTQ+ youth who didn't have accepting families. He wanted to be for them what his parents had been for him. He performed in drag shows across Oxford. He had a gift for fashion and makeup. He had a Pomeranian named Lexus. He called his mother multiple times every day. He had best friends he considered family. He had dreams of helping vulnerable populations. He had a future that should have been long and impactful. Jay never got to finish his master's degree, never got to become a licensed social worker, never got to help the youth he cared about, never got to perform again. He was taken by someone he trusted, someone he had been intimate with, someone he probably cared about. His family lost a son, a brother, a presence that filled their lives with light. His friends lost someone irreplaceable. The LGBTQ+ community lost an advocate. The world lost whatever good Jay would have brought over decades of living. Even with Timothy's conviction, questions remain. What exactly happened in that apartment between 6:03 a.m. and 7 a.m.? We will likely never know because the only two people who were there can't or won't tell us. Why did Timothy end Jay's life? Was it about keeping his sexuality secret? Was it about control? Was it rage? Timothy never explained his motive fully. His attorney said Timothy never told him why. Sheldon Timothy Harrington Jr. is currently serving his sentence in a Mississippi state prison. He will be at least 65 years old before he's eligible for parole. He may spend the rest of his life incarcerated. He accepted responsibility by pleading guilty, but he never fully explained why he did what he did. That answer passed away with Jay, or remains locked inside Timothy's conscience. Jimmy J. Lee's remains were laid to rest with his family finally able to say goodbye properly. His gold necklace, the one that helped identify him after 939 days, is kept by his family as a reminder of the son they lost. Every July 8th, they mark another year without him. Every time Stephanie Lee's birthday arrives, she remembers the last message Jay sent her at 2:13 a.m. before he disappeared. This case forces difficult conversations about homophobia and its deadly consequences, about the danger of shame and secrecy, about relationships conducted in hiding, about warning signs people ignore, about the importance of listening to instinct when something feels wrong, about the need for better missing persons protocols, about technology company responsibilities during investigations, about how one person can prevent justice, about family acceptance and what happens when it doesn't exist. If you take one thing from Jay's story, let it be this: authenticity matters more than acceptance from people who can't accept themselves. Love openly. Live honestly. Trust your instincts when someone's behavior doesn't match their words. And if you're struggling with who you are, please find someone safe to talk to. Shame and secrecy can consume your soul until you become capable of things you never imagined possible. Get help. Find acceptance. Because Jay Lee lived openly and beautifully, and Timothy Harrington destroyed both their lives trying to hide who he was. Rest in peace, Jimmy J. Lee. Your mother still hears your voice in her memories. Your friends still tell stories about your performances. Your community still fights for the justice you deserved. Your legacy lives on. Thank you for staying with me through this incredibly difficult story. Jay Lee deserved so much more than he received. His family deserved more than 939 days of searching. If this case moved you, if you believe stories like Jay's need to be told, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations. What case should we investigate next? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. And please, if you or someone you know is experiencing relationship violence or manipulation, or if you're struggling with your sexuality and need support, reach out for help. Your support means everything to this channel. The deep research and careful production these stories require takes significant time and resources. Consider joining our YouTube membership today to access exclusive content, get early video releases, and help us continue covering cases that deserve attention. Your membership directly supports the work that brings you these comprehensive investigations. Click the Join button below to become a member.